My beloved child, don't skip. Listen carefully, because this fictional story begins on an ordinary afternoon when one unexpected conversation quietly changes the direction of two lives. Stay until the very end, because what unfolds next is not a prediction about your life or someone else's. It is a fictional story about honesty, healing, courage, and discovering that sometimes the greatest distance between two hearts is not measured in miles but in the words left unspoken. Every chapter of this journey reminds us that genuine relationships are built through truth, patience, and compassion rather than assumptions or fear. The morning had begun like every other. Streets filled with people rushing toward work, cafes welcomed familiar customers, children laughed on their way to school, and life continued with its usual rhythm. Yet hidden beneath the ordinary routines, one heart carried a quiet burden. For many months, the person in this story had believed their feelings would remain forever unnoticed. They convinced themselves that silence was safer than vulnerability. Every time they considered speaking honestly, fear whispered that rejection would hurt more than regret. So they smiled politely, continued living responsibly, and quietly placed their emotions where no one else could see them. Meanwhile, someone else had unknowingly been walking through their own season of reflection. They had noticed kindness shown during difficult moments, encouragement offered without expecting recognition, and quiet acts of generosity that often went unseen by everyone else. Although they admired these qualities deeply, they never fully understood how much they truly meant until one ordinary conversation unexpectedly revealed the truth. My beloved child, don't skip this part, because the emotional heart of this fictional story begins here. That afternoon, while helping organize donations at a neighborhood community center, an old friend gently shared something unexpected. During the conversation they quietly mentioned, "You know, someone has cared deeply about you for much longer than you probably realize. They never wanted to pressure you or expect anything in return. They simply hoped your life would be filled with peace, happiness, and kindness, even if they never found the courage to tell you." Those words completely changed the atmosphere. The room suddenly felt quieter. The person stood motionless for several moments, replaying countless memories that had once seemed ordinary. Every encouraging conversation. Every thoughtful gesture. Every moment when someone had quietly shown patience instead of judgment. They suddenly realized those moments had carried far greater meaning than they had ever understood. For the rest of the afternoon, concentration became almost impossible. They looked at unfinished work resting on the table before them. Then toward the window. Then quietly closed their notebook. Not because they were chasing another person, but because they realized they no longer wanted fear deciding another important chapter of their life. In this fictional story, what they experienced as God's guidance was not a command directing them towards someone else. It was the quiet conviction that honesty is always healthier than endless uncertainty. Living with unanswered questions had become heavier than speaking sincerely. Before leaving, they informed everyone that they needed the remainder of the afternoon for something deeply important. No one questioned the decision. Sometimes quiet determination speaks more clearly than many explanations. Walking through familiar streets suddenly felt completely different. Every place reminded them of moments they had once overlooked. The park where gentle conversations had happened after difficult days. The small coffee shop where encouraging smiles had quietly brightened ordinary mornings. The old bridge where laughter had once made heavy burdens feel lighter. Looking back, they realized they had never truly been unaware. They had simply been too afraid to believe someone could care so deeply without asking for anything in return. Listen carefully, my beloved child, because this fictional story now reveals one of its deepest truths. Sometimes people do not begin running toward another person because everything suddenly becomes certain. Sometimes they begin moving because they finally understand that courage is not waiting until every doubt disappears. Courage is choosing honesty even while uncertainty still exists. In this fictional story, what they experienced as God's guidance gently encouraged them to stop allowing fear to write every ending before life had even reached the next chapter. As evening slowly approached, golden sunlight stretched across quiet streets while gentle breezes carried the fragrance of blooming flowers through the town. Their pace became steady, not hurried by panic, but strengthened by purpose. They carried no dramatic speeches carefully prepared in advance. They carried only gratitude, humility, and the sincere desire to finally speak honestly. Perfect words were never required. Only an honest heart. As the sun slowly disappeared beyond the distant hills, they quietly whispered a simple prayer. Help me speak with kindness. Help me listen with humility. Whatever tomorrow brings, let me walk with integrity instead of fear. Peace quietly replaced anxiety. The future remained unwritten. Yet for the first time in many years, that uncertainty no longer frightened them. My beloved child, don't skip these closing words, because the next chapter of this fictional journey will reveal what happened when two hearts, each transformed through patience, forgiveness, and personal growth, finally met face to face, discovering that the greatest miracle was never finding perfect timing, but becoming people capable of building a future founded upon honesty, mutual respect, enduring compassion, and hope. My beloved child, don't skip this chapter, because in this fictional story, the quiet journey that began with hidden feelings is about to enter its most meaningful season. Listen carefully, because what happens next is not about dramatic destiny or impossible certainty. It is about two people who have spent enough time growing separately that they are finally ready to meet each other with honesty instead of fear. This is not a prediction about your life or anyone else's. It is a fictional story about courage, forgiveness, hope, and the quiet beauty of sincere conversations. The evening air had grown cooler by the time they reached the familiar park where so many ordinary memories had quietly become extraordinary. The sun rested low upon the horizon, filling the sky with warm shades of amber, crimson, and soft violet. Children laughed in the distance, families slowly walked along peaceful pathways, and gentle breezes carried the fragrance of blooming flowers through the trees. Nothing about the evening appeared unusual to anyone else. Yet within one heart, years of silence were finally coming to an end. Every step toward the meeting felt strangely familiar. The same paths they had once walked without noticing now seemed filled with reminders of everything life had quietly been teaching them. They remembered the days when fear convinced them to remain silent. They remembered the nights when they replayed unfinished conversations, wishing they had spoken more honestly. Looking back now, they realized that every season of waiting had shaped them into someone capable of offering something far greater than perfect words. They could now offer a truthful heart. My beloved child, don't skip this part, because the emotional heart of this fictional story begins here. As they approached the old wooden bridge crossing the peaceful lake, they noticed someone already standing there quietly watching the sunset. Neither rushed toward the other. Neither rehearsed dramatic speeches. They simply smiled with genuine warmth that spoke far more clearly than hurried explanations ever could. For several peaceful moments, neither person spoke. The silence itself felt different. It no longer carried uncertainty. It carried understanding. Finally, one softly said, "I've spent so much time wondering whether honesty would change everything." The other smiled gently before replying, "Maybe honesty doesn't change everything. Maybe it simply allows the truth to begin." Those simple words brought unexpected peace. They slowly began talking, not about what should have happened years ago, but about everything life had quietly taught them since then. They spoke about difficult seasons that strengthened patience. They shared lessons learned through disappointment. They admitted mistakes without trying to defend themselves. They expressed gratitude for moments of kindness they had never forgotten. Neither attempted to prove they were perfect. Instead, both celebrated how much they had grown. As twilight settled across the peaceful lake, they discovered something remarkable. The conversation no longer centered on the past alone. It naturally turned toward the kind of people they hoped to continue becoming. They spoke about serving others, protecting family relationships, remaining faithful to their values, and building every future decision upon honesty rather than assumption. In this fictional story, what they experienced as God's guidance was not revealing exactly how tomorrow would unfold. It was the quiet encouragement to protect what had already been built within their hearts. Humility instead of pride, compassion instead of resentment, patience instead of pressure, and truth instead of fear. Those qualities quietly became the strongest foundation beneath every conversation they shared. Before leaving that evening, neither person made impossible promises. Instead, one simply said, "Let's continue choosing honesty one day at a time." The other quietly nodded. I think that's where every meaningful journey truly begins. Those words carried greater strength than any dramatic declaration ever could. Listen carefully, my beloved child, because this fictional story now reveals one of its deepest truths. Relationships are not transformed because every question suddenly receives an answer. They grow stronger when two people continue choosing integrity after difficult seasons, gratitude after disappointment, forgiveness after mistakes, and hope after uncertainty. Those ordinary decisions quietly become extraordinary over time. Walking home beneath countless stars, both felt lighter than they had in many years. Nothing had been forced. Nothing had been hurried. The future still contained unanswered chapters. Yet neither feared them anymore. They had learned that trust grows through faithful actions repeated consistently rather than through grand promises spoken once. My beloved child, don't skip these closing words, because the next chapter of this fictional journey will reveal how one simple invitation shared during the following sunrise quietly brings both families together, proving that the strongest connections are not built through extraordinary moments alone. They are built through ordinary days filled with kindness, humility, faithful communication, and enduring hope. My beloved child, don't skip this chapter, because in this fictional story, the meeting that almost never happened becomes the beginning of something neither heart expected. Listen carefully, because the most meaningful conversations are rarely remembered for dramatic words. They are remembered because, for the first time, two people stop protecting themselves with fear and begin speaking with complete honesty. This is not a prediction about your life or anyone else's. It is a fictional story about courage, forgiveness, healing, and the quiet beauty of choosing truth over silence. The following morning arrived with a peaceful stillness that seemed to rest over the entire town. Soft sunlight filtered through the trees, the cool breeze carried the fragrance of fresh flowers, and every familiar street seemed brighter than before. The person who had spent so many months hiding behind uncertainty woke with an unfamiliar feeling. Not excitement, not anxiety, but peace. They realized they no longer needed to imagine endless possibilities because they had finally chosen to live honestly. Whatever happened next would be built upon truth instead of assumptions. Later that afternoon, they arrived at the small family cafe where they had agreed to meet once more. It was a quiet place filled with warm wooden tables, fresh coffee, gentle music, and friendly conversations. Nothing about the cafe seemed extraordinary. Yet to both of them, it quietly became one of the most important places they would ever remember. Neither arrived carrying expectations. Neither came hoping to control the future. They simply came with grateful hearts and the willingness to listen. My beloved child, don't skip this part, because the emotional heart of this fictional story begins here. As they sat together, neither hurried the conversation. They spoke about family, the lessons life had taught them, the mistakes that had helped them grow, and the people who had encouraged them during difficult seasons. Every answer revealed something beautiful. They discovered they had both spent the same months learning nearly identical lessons. They had both learned that forgiveness brings freedom, that patience produces wisdom, and that genuine love cannot grow where fear controls every decision. After a long pause, one quietly smiled and admitted, "I almost never came today." The other looked surprised. "I almost didn't come either." Both laughed softly. Not because it was funny, but because they suddenly realized how close fear had come to stealing another meaningful chapter from both of their lives. The conversation continued until the afternoon sunlight slowly turned golden. Neither tried to impress the other. They no longer needed perfect answers. Instead, they simply remained present. Every honest sentence built another layer of trust. Every patient moment strengthened respect. Every shared smile reminded them that the strongest friendships are often built through quiet sincerity rather than dramatic promises. In this fictional story, what they experienced as God's guidance was not arranging every detail according to human plans. It was the quiet encouragement to continue choosing humility over pride, gratitude over regret, honesty over avoidance, and compassion over fear. Those daily choices had quietly prepared both hearts long before this meeting ever took place. As they prepared to leave, one reached into a pocket and unfolded the same handwritten letter that had never been sent. Looking at it for a brief moment, they gently smiled before folding it again. "I don't think I need this anymore," they quietly said. The other looked curiously. "Why?" "Because everything I wanted to say has already been spoken honestly." Those words carried more peace than any perfect letter ever could. Listen carefully, my beloved child, because this fictional story now reveals one of its deepest truths. Sometimes we believe healing comes when someone else finally understands our heart. Yet true healing often begins much earlier, when we become brave enough to understand our own. Once fear no longer controls our decisions, relationships become places of freedom instead of pressure. In this fictional story, what they experienced as God's guidance gently reminded them that lasting connections are built one truthful conversation at a time. Before saying goodbye, neither promised forever. Neither rushed tomorrow. Instead, they simply agreed to continue living according to the same values that had quietly brought them together. Honesty, kindness, patience, humility, gratitude, and hope. Walking home beneath the glowing evening sky, both quietly realized that something far greater than romance had begun. A friendship built upon genuine character. A trust strengthened through truthful conversation. A future no longer controlled by fear. My beloved child, don't skip these closing words, because the final chapter of this fictional journey will reveal how one ordinary family gathering becomes the place where both families witness the quiet transformation that honesty, forgiveness, and faithful kindness have accomplished, proving that the greatest blessing was never simply finding each other, but becoming the kind of people capable of protecting something truly meaningful together. My beloved child, don't skip these final words, because every chapter of this fictional story has been leading to this peaceful and unforgettable ending. Listen carefully, because what began with hidden feelings and silent prayers was never truly a story about whether two people would find each other. It became a story about two hearts learning to become honest enough, humble enough, and courageous enough to recognize something beautiful when it finally appeared before them. This is not a prediction about your life or your future. It is a fictional story about hope, healing, faith, and the extraordinary power of ordinary kindness. Months quietly passed after their first honest conversation. Life did not suddenly become perfect. There were still responsibilities to fulfill, difficult seasons to navigate, unexpected disappointments, and ordinary days that tested patience. Yet something had changed forever. Neither person allowed fear to become the author of their decisions anymore. Whenever misunderstandings appeared, they chose conversation before silence. Whenever mistakes were made, they apologized before pride had the opportunity to build walls. Every ordinary day became another opportunity to protect trust instead of assuming it would always remain. One beautiful autumn afternoon, both families gathered together for the town's annual harvest festival. The streets overflowed with joyful laughter. Children carried colorful lanterns through the park. Musicians filled the air with gentle melodies while neighbors shared homemade meals beneath strings of warm golden lights. Looking around, everyone noticed how naturally the two families had grown close over the passing months. Friendships had quietly formed. Respect had deepened. Conversations flowed easily because everyone had learned something valuable through the journey they had shared. My beloved child, don't skip this part, because this is the emotional heart of the entire fictional story. As evening approached, the town gathered beneath the same old oak tree where so many quiet moments of reflection had taken place. The elderly mentor stepped forward once more, smiling warmly at every familiar face before gently speaking. There was a time, the mentor began, when many believed this story was about two people finding one another. But now I understand something much more beautiful. The crowd listened quietly. This story was never about searching. It was about becoming. Because when hearts choose honesty instead of fear, kindness instead of resentment, gratitude instead of regret, and hope instead of despair, they naturally become places where genuine love feels safe to grow. Silence gently settled across the gathering. Not an uncomfortable silence. A peaceful one. The two quietly looked toward one another. Neither needed dramatic promises. Neither needed perfect words. One softly smiled and said, "I'm grateful we didn't meet as the people we used to be." The other quietly nodded. "So am I." If we had, fear might have spoken louder than wisdom. Both smiled gently because they knew those words were true. In this fictional story, what they experienced as God's guidance had never forced two lives together. Instead, it quietly invited each person to grow through every season until they became capable of building relationships rooted in humility, patience, truth, and compassion. The miracle was never about controlling circumstances. It was about transforming character. Years quietly passed within this fictional story. The old oak tree continued standing faithfully at the center of the town. Children who once played beneath its branches became adults known for their generosity. Families who once struggled to communicate learned to listen with greater patience. Neighbors who had once barely greeted one another became lifelong friends. Many people believe these changes happened because of one extraordinary event. Only a few understood the deeper truth. Everything had begun the day someone chose honesty instead of silence. Listen carefully, my beloved child, because this fictional story now shares its final truth. The strongest relationships are never built by perfect timing alone. They are built by people who continue choosing honesty after disappointment. Compassion after misunderstanding. Forgiveness after mistakes. Faithfulness during ordinary days. Hope when tomorrow remains unseen. Those quiet decisions become stronger than fear could ever be. As the final evening of the festival drew to a close, hundreds of lanterns illuminated the peaceful streets. The entire town walked together toward the hill overlooking the valley where the first stars slowly appeared above them. Looking across the countless lights, the mentor quietly whispered, "One honest heart can illuminate an entire community." Everyone smiled. Because they had witnessed it themselves. My beloved child, remember these closing words as this fictional journey comes to its end. Never believe that sincere kindness is wasted. Never assume patient love goes unnoticed. Never allow fear to speak louder than truth or pride to become stronger than compassion. Continue choosing honesty while there is still time, forgiveness while hearts remain open, gratitude during ordinary days, and hope even when the road ahead cannot yet be fully seen. And so, as one final sunrise stretched across the horizon with breathtaking shades of gold, rose, and blue, the two families stood together watching the new day begin. No one spoke for several peaceful moments. They didn't need to. Everything important had already been lived. The greatest miracle was never that hidden feelings had finally been discovered. The greatest miracle was that two hearts, once separated by fear, had become people capable of building a future through trust instead of uncertainty, humility instead of pride, and faithful kindness instead of empty promises. And as the morning light filled the valley below, everyone quietly walked forward. Not chasing perfection, but carrying something far more lasting, hearts transformed by truth, lives strengthened by compassion, and hope renewed with every beautiful sunrise. And with that peaceful realization, one fictional story came to its close while countless new stories of kindness, healing, and enduring hope were only just beginning.